As we head into the next session, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Ryan Anderson, who is here to speak with us on the question, what is marriage?
The question that I want to ask and then answer is, what is marriage from a policy perspective? What is the state's interest in marriage? How does the state define marriage? How should the state define marriage, and why? Now, I would imagine that everyone in this room is in favor of marriage equality. Everyone in this room is for marriage equality. We all want the law to treat all marriages equally. What we may disagree with one another in this room about is what sort of relationship is a marriage? Because that's the question that you have to answer before you can then get to considerations of equality. And if you're a lawyer, before you can get to considerations of equal protection of the law, you have to know what it is that the law is trying to protect equally. So what is the marital relationship? Because even those who want to redefine marriage to include the same-sex couple will draw certain lines between what sort of relationship is a marriage, what sort of relationship is not a marriage. And if we're going to draw lines that are based on principle, if we're going to draw lines that reflect the truth, we have to know what sort of a relationship is a marriage and what sort of other consenting adult relationships are non-marital. So that's what I'm going to try to get at in the time that we have here this morning. To people in the audience, when we get to the Q&A, I invite you to give an answer to these questions of, if you want to redefine marriage to include the same-sex couple, why would marriage, how you understand it, require that that relationship be permanent, monogamous, and exclusive, and be the type of relationship that a government takes interest in? We take our bearings from Aristotle in our article and in our book in how to analyze any sort of a community. Aristotle tells us that you can analyze any community by looking at the actions that the community engages in, the goods that the community seeks, and then the norms of commitment that shape that community's common life together. In biological function, we're radically incomplete. He mentioned it's the function of procreation. So that in that conjugal act, a man and a woman don't just rub up against each other or interlock as if I was to stick my finger in one of your ears. They truly form a two-in-one flesh union. It's a single function, a single organism that's being formed by a mated pair. It's a single biological purpose that the twosome performs together as a unity. In the same way, that man and that woman, when they unite in that conjugal act, are coordinating towards a single, unified biological purpose, that good of procreation. And so the Hebrew Scriptures, when it describes them in that act as a two-in-one flesh union, they're not just speaking poetically or metaphorically, they're revealing something true about human nature and about what the sexual complementarity of a man and a woman allows for in terms of an act that can unite them. And now this act unites them so completely that 9 months later, it frequently requires a name. The lovemaking act is also the life-giving act. The act that unites a man and a woman as husband and wife is the same act that can make them mother and father. And so that begins to tell us something about what the marital relationship is ordered towards. What is the orientation, the orderedness, the good that the marital relationship seeks? It's the marital relationship, spouses engage in a marital act that is intrinsically ordered towards both their unity and the procreation, and then the rearing and education of children. So it's a comprehensive action that unites them, hearts, minds, and bodies, that then orients them towards a comprehensive good, the procreation, the rearing, the education, the raising of new human beings. And then lastly, this can explain why marriage requires comprehensive commitments, both exclusive and permanent. And so that leads us into the second part of my talk this morning. Why does marriage matter? Why should anyone care? Why should the state in particular care? I think from a policy vantage point, marriage exists to unite a man and a woman as husband and wife, so then they're then equipped to be mother and father to any children that that union produces. It's based on an anthropological truth that men and women are distinct and complementary. It's based on the biological fact that reproduction requires a man and a woman, It's based on the social reality that children deserve both a mother and a father. Whenever a child is born, a mother will be close by. She's normally in the same room. That's a fact of biology. The question for culture, and so therefore the question for policy, is will a father be close by? And if so, for how long? And marriage is the institution that different societies throughout time and across the globe have devised to maximize the likelihood that that man commits to that woman permanently and exclusively, and then the two of them, committed to one another, take responsibility to raise that child. Because when this doesn't happen, social costs, both for the spouses and for the child and for all of the community, run high. But before getting to the cost, let me say one more thing about why that union matters. One of the things we know from the social scientists is that there's no such thing as parenting. No such thing as parenting in the abstract. There's mothering and there's fathering. Men and women bring different gifts to the parenting enterprise. And so in our book, we quote David Popenoe, a sociologist at at Rutgers University in New Jersey. He says, quote, "The burden of social science evidence supports the idea that gender-differentiated parenting is important for human development and that the contribution of fathers to child rearing is unique and irreplaceable," end quote. He then concluded, and this was in a literature review of all of the social science at that point, he says, "We should disavow the notion that mommies can make good daddies, just as we should disavow the popular notion that daddies can make good mommies. The two sexes are different to the core, and each is necessary culturally and biologically for the optimal development of a human being," end quote. But it is to say that marriage matters, and that the state has an interest in promoting marriage precisely to maximize the likelihood that every child is given the gift of being raised by a married mother and father. And because what we know is that marriage is the institution that when it's stable, it protects children from poverty. It increases the likelihood of those children will experience social mobility. It protects children from committing crime. And it prevents the state from having to pick up the pieces in the form of a welfare program or a police program. So more or less everything that you could care about, if you care about social justice and you care about limited government, if you care about the poor and you care about freedom, is better served by having a healthy marriage culture, a civil society institution that takes care of raising that next generation, than by having the government try to pick up the pieces of a broken marriage culture. That's why marriage matters. So what are the consequences of redefining marriage? Because how would redefining marriage to include same-sex couples in any way take away from the public purpose of marriage? And so for the first consequence, I'll say, is that if you were to redefine marriage to eliminate the norm of sexual complementarity, there would be no institution left in civil society and in public life that upheld, even as an ideal, that every child deserves both a mother and a father. The message that redefining marriage to make it a genderless institution would send is that men and women are interchangeable, that mothers and fathers are substitutionable, and that two moms or two dads is the same thing as a married mom and a dad. So the law would be teaching something about marriage, and it would be teaching that marriage is much more about the desires of adults than about the needs of children. It recenters the marital relationship around adult romance, adult emotion, as I mentioned at the beginning, the priority of the intense emotional union of the adult, rather than about the type of institution that can create new life and then unite that new life with the man and the woman who gave him or her new life. It suggests to me that the most pressing social problem in America right now is the problem of absentee fathers. But how will we insist that fathers are essential when the law is teaching that fathers are optional? Second consequence is that there is no reason to think that redefining marriage would stop here. And to me, there is no logical reason, once you get rid of the male-female aspect, for why these further redefinitions don't simply follow like night follows day. So let me run through these briefly. The first is the term throuple. And the general idea is that if marriage is just about an intense emotional union, where spouses have romantic feelings for each other and then pledge to take care of each other, they commingle assets, they live together, they enjoy economies of scale, and they love one another. So the other convenient but empty slogan is that love equals love. Why isn't the throuple in the same exact situation as the couple? And so if you go to court and say, we are suing for our marriage equality rights for the same-sex couple, on what basis would you deny marriage equality to the same-sex throuple or the opposite-sex quartet? Because the way that we arrived at monogamy in Western law and culture is that it's one man and one woman who can unite in the comprehensive act that produces new life, and every new life has one mother and one father. And marriage is about uniting those people into a stable family life. But once you say the male-female aspect of marriage is irrational and arbitrary and bigoted, what is magical about the number 2? What is the principled reason for denying marriage equality to 3s and 4s and more? So that next term we came across was the term monogamish. And this was in a profile of the gay rights activist Dan Savage. And so he says that provided it's an open and honest discussion where the spouses agree to it, there's no coercion and there's no deceit, spouses should be free to have a sexually open relationship. And then the final term that we came across was the term wed lease. If you only signed up for a wed lease in the first place, if you signed up for a 5 or a 10-year marriage license, which could then be renewed on good behavior, but if it wasn't going well, it would have a natural sunset clause. Again, you see how this, like the monogamish relationship, like the throuple, are all logical entailments of viewing marriage as just about consenting adult romance. Because consenting adult romance can come in as many sizes and shapes as adults can consent to. And if love equals love, there would be no reason for public policy to treat certain sizes and shapes of consenting adult love differently than other sizes and shapes. To do so would be to deny marriage equality to those relationships that are throuples or monogamish or wed leases. And again, remember, the reason that the government's in the marriage business is not because it's a sucker for romance. Government's not in the marriage business because it cares about my love life. Government's in the marriage business because the sexual union of a man and a woman can produce a child, and that child deserves a mother and a father, and when this doesn't happen, social costs run high. So the government's trying to vindicate and to protect the rights of children and minimize harm to the community as a whole. But the throuple and the wed lease and the monogamish relationship make it more likely that a man has multiple sexual partners in short-lived relationships. That's what a throuple with a wed lease with a monogamish condition attached to it would entail. And so it directly undercuts the public policy purpose of marriage in the first place. And yet all of those further redefinitions follow logically from getting rid of the male-female aspect of marriage. If you say that marriage has nothing to do with the union of a man and a woman and the procreative potential and capacity of that act and of that relationship, then what are you left with for saying that it should be a union permanent and exclusive of twosomes? It seems like you're left with a house of cards. So that's the last consequence for religious liberty. We've already seen in the state of Massachusetts, the state of Illinois, and the District of Columbia that evangelical and Catholic adoption agencies and foster care providers have had to shut down because the government said they had to place children with same-sex couples on an equal footing as they did with a married mother and father. And we've then seen cases of photographers and florists and bakers and innkeepers, more or less every professional that intersects with the wedding industry has now been hauled into court, brought up on charges of discriminating against a same-sex couple. This is part of a larger trend that we've seen in general of people arguing that religious liberty just means freedom to worship. It's that you have freedom to worship. What you do on Sunday morning, no one's going to interfere with. But once you step out into the marketplace, Monday through Saturday, you have to leave your faith at the door. That if you're on Main Street or on Wall Street, you can't live out your faith in your profession. That's not what the free exercise of religion is about. That's what freedom of worship is about. The free exercise of religion, as the founders intended it, was that the state wouldn't coerce people into violating their consciences. But that'll be, I think, one of the first consequences that we see with the redefinition of marriage, coupled with these sexual orientation and gender identity non-discrimination statutes, is that they will use the law to coerce people into celebrating and treating a same-sex relationship as if it's a marriage, even when it violates their consciences.